Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Hello. I am not sure about this one, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I'm sure of the idea, but it's not quite completely cooked. I've also found that when I've written an idea out, I get caught between sort of riffing and my concept slowly coming together and reading what it is that I sort of worked out. And it seems to come from a different part in the brain. Anyway, so I'll give it a try. I also wanted to note that in the last episode, Current Chaos, when I listen back on my computer, it's fine. When I listen in my truck that has bass, I realize that there are probably 15, 20 times during the episode, I'm banging the desk either with my knee or my hand, and it's this bassy like boom, boom, which is super clear and obvious. It sounds like, you know, I'm pulling a Hitler and yelling and pounding the podium. Anyway, so until I can solve that problem, change something in the recording environment, maybe get the microphone mounted on a boom arm, I will do my best not to bang the desk so that if you're listening on a system that has bass, you don't hear these cacophonous booms. Anyway, so referring back to the episode I did on Current Chaos, this is sort of an outgrowth of that gets more specific about people's relationship to language and behavior. And my brain sort of cooked in a lot more specific ways what I was talking about in Current Chaos. And I'll just do a very brief summary. In Current Chaos, I was outlining a lot of the craziness that's going on in the world and noting that it's like, this is not different. The human race has always been violent, crazy, brutal, cruel, selfish, but that people are really struggling with it as a reality now. And my hypothesis is that they're not struggling because it's more violent than it has been before. It's the same as it always has been. But it is because our consciousness has raised, and the people who lie are lying much more boldly, I think also more desperately. It's more blatantly obvious, and just like, it's kind of like they know we know and they just don't know what to do about it. So they're like, fuck you, we don't care that you know, we're going to do it anyway, and we're just going to say these things and you're going to go along with it because you always have. And so I was outlining a way to deal with that was what a lot of people do who end up with anxiety and depression is, especially if they come from a trauma family where they've been gaslit and they've spent their entire lives with their bodies trying to resolve a lie that their parents told, that they were good parents or that they were loving or that they were not abusive, and the reality in which their parents were abusive. And so a child will take that into their body and feel very anxious and get very depressed and feel very conflicted and confused and fatigued because their body's sitting here running a program to try to solve an equation that is never going to be solved because it involves trying to resolve an out-and-out lie with something that's true, and they just don't go together. You see there, I didn't clap, so you didn't get the smack. And so this is an outgrowth of that in which I get much more, I thought about it more and I got more specific. And this is about levels. And when I say levels, I don't mean, I know that there are spiritual folk who are kind of full of shit who talk as if there are advanced spiritual levels. And they're always sort of implying that they've reached an advanced level and have more insight, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact is if you did have more insight, you wouldn't be bragging about being at a superior spiritual level, whatever. I don't know. I don't think that there are spiritually advanced levels. I think there are people who are at different stages of either digging their way into separation from self so that they can have certain kinds of experiences, or working their way back into remembering self and authenticity with self so that they can reunite with God consciousness or unified consciousness. There is no better. There's nothing but the infinite now, and they're all just experiences so that consciousness can learn. So if someone is far more disconnected and behaving in a way that we consider ignorant, they're just experiencing greater disconnection because they chose to. They're not less spiritually advanced than someone who's on their way back to remembering who and what they are. That's my theory. I'm not a spiritual leader. I don't know what the truth is. But in this, I do lay out what within our human reality are levels of language and behavior fidelity. And I cooked it in a much more detailed manner. So that's what I'm going to get into. So it may work, it may not work, because I am going to be referring to what I read and then sort of riffing on that, which I tend to be less smooth, and I feel like I tend to be less coherent and cohesive when I do it, but whatever. I already wrote it. So at the first level is the level, or is a style similar to what I was talking about in Current Chaos. And they are these people who have no fidelity between their behaviors, their habitual behaviors, their language behaviors, their patterns, the energy they carry, what people experience from them when they walk in the room, versus the reality they attempt to create because they want to believe something about them, right? And then it creates a lot of chaos. It can be chaotic to interact with them because if you take them at face value, what they say or certain behaviors they present, and then you find out through patterns that that's not at all the way they are. And if you sit there and try to make excuses for them, you're going to internalize a lot of conflict. So what I said is, speaking as if I am this person, right? What I wrote was, I am not aware of my intentions, nor how my language or actions connect to my intentions. I'm definitely not aware of how people receive or experience my actions or language. Interacting with me can be chaotic and confusing unless you merely focus on my unconscious, existentially driven habits and behaviors. These tend to be very consistent, or at least habitual. However, if someone points them out or tries to negotiate changes, I will deny that those patterns exist or that they are a pattern in the first place. If you focus on my language, you will experience a constant separation between how I want to think of myself versus what my habits, behaviors, and words add up to, right? So you get this sort of person who actually has very little understanding of how other people experience things and who other people are and what other people's history is and what other people's conscious and unconscious content is. But they also don't have much insider understanding of their own unconscious content or conscious content. So they're unaware of their own patterns. They're unable to identify them. They're unable to work to mitigate them when they're negative or difficult. They're unable to leverage them when they're positive or good. And so the only thing that you can rely on with this person is that their unconscious habits and patterns and compulsions are predictable. They're going to keep happening because they won't even admit that they have unconscious patterns, right? So they're not going to do anything to change them. They're not going to raise them into consciousness. So that person is predictable if you stop listening to what they say and just watch their patterns and watch their unconscious compulsions and just go, that's what you're going to get with that person, right? And interacting with that person is difficult if you expect some fidelity. That kind of person is very difficult for people like myself who are sort of hyper married to verbalization and live in a somewhat left brain analytical, language-oriented reality. A lot of other people can look at that person and go, that guy's full of shit. Just don't listen, right? And I've always had a hard time with that because I intend a lot of fidelity with my language and my intentions. That doesn't mean I'm not full of shit. I am, but I have a really strong intention that my energy and my behaviors and my habits have some fidelity with my language. And so I sort of narcissistically assume that other people are doing the same thing, and that kind of person is not doing that at all, right? They may even be leveraging language simply as something nothing more than to get an outcome, and it's going to be an outcome that they simply want in the moment, right? Okay, So the next one is one I had not thought about before, but as I was thinking through this, I was like, oh my God, like that's a kind of person. I've been that kind of person. And you see this kind of person in couples therapy a lot. Well, you don't see them a lot, but when you see them, you know them. They have a very specific role, and they're difficult for their spouse and for the therapist to deal with because they're super legalistic about language. So this person, they have become more aware of their own internal state. They've become more aware of their intentions and what they intend with their actions or what they mean with their language. However, they have very little awareness or understanding of how people might experience their actions or their language. So at this stage, people become very legalistic about language and its objective meaning. And they're very focused on their own intent as the most important factor. And if you point out to them that regardless of what they intended, someone was hurt or they experienced their actions or language in a way that wasn't intended, they immediately become defensive and assert that the language they used has an objective meaning, and if someone didn't receive it exactly the way they intended, it's that person's fault. That person is weak, they're crazy, they're too sensitive, right? And so this person's interesting because there is a consistency with them and they do hold themselves responsible, but they only understand their own experience and their own internal reasoning and their own, right, how things work. And because they're caught in a world where every single person you run into has their own history, their own religion, their own reality, their own, childhood trauma, their own ways of making meaning of things, their own inherited biological brain, right? I have 2 brothers, 2 sisters. We're all completely different. I have my own brain, so it doesn't even matter that we come from the same genetic material. I have a very distinct brain in my family, right? So each person has that. But this person at this second stage or second type is only aware of what they have. So they're a little bit calmer. You experience less chaos. They're predictable. They hold themselves responsible to have fidelity with their own words and actions as they intended it. But because they don't have the complexity and they haven't learned enough to also incorporate other people's reality, they've become very legalistic because they only understand their own reality and they attempt to explain it and communicate it clearly and with fidelity, but there are going to be lots of people who get hurt or don't understand what they mean, and so they become more and more legalistic about, oh, but there's objective meanings. This is what these kind of people are always like, well, everyone knows what that means. Well, that's the way everyone does it. Like, I don't know what your problem is. I mean, if you go out into society and talk to 100 people, most of them are going to agree with me that this is what this means and blah, blah, blah. I don't know what the problem is. I told you exactly what I meant to say, and I wasn't trying to insult you, and I wasn't trying to hurt you. So if you got insulted or hurt, you've got issues. You should probably go see a therapist, right? So you see these kinds of negotiations from this person, but these people lack any sense or understanding that that their own experience and internal reality is not objective, right? And they kind of know that. So in order to anchor themselves and to deal with the fact that nobody else has the same experience or necessarily agrees with them, or there's all of this chaos when you interact with other people, they become very legalistic and they're always trying to establish the objective meaning. And the only way they can do that is to refer to some abstract idea of the rules and the norms and the mores of society. Well, this is what society set up. This is what's socially acceptable. This is what we consider moral and immoral. We consider this fair. We consider this unfair. And I'm just going along with that. So if you have issues with what I did, I followed the rules. It's your problem, right? So you get a lot of that from this kind of person. The narcissism is that they only understand themselves, and that they're always trying to set themselves up as the objective intention and communication because they don't understand other people, and they don't understand that their own experience is very subjective, and they don't understand that society itself is just a big amalgam of a bunch of bullshit subjective beliefs and ideas and opinions and inherited attitudes, right? So these people are also narcissistic in the sense that these people demand to be understood because that is how they ensure that there is an objective connection between what they intended with their words or actions, but they do not seek to understand anything outside the prescribed cultural definitions for how someone should be treated, right? So there's this personality type. They're pleasant. They're going to follow the rules of society. If you have a lot of commonality with them, right? If you have shared experiences and shared beliefs, you will find them, they're a great friend. They're supportive. They seem understanding. But because they only really understand their own experience, and in order to communicate it, they need objective language, they will tend to refer to their own experience as an assumed objective reality, or they'll refer to society's beliefs, mores, and norms as objectively true, because what they really want is they want to be able to say what they want to say and be understood. And they don't want to deal with the complexity of the fact that there are other people, and those people don't understand, and sometimes those people get hurt, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So their narcissism is they seek to be understood, but they do not care about understanding other people unless that other person already agrees with their perception of reality at that stage. But they integrate well, and they do really well in business, and they do really well in sports, and they do really well in organized, predictable structures. They tend to do well in society because they're just following the rules. They're self-interested, so they're fighting hard for what they want, so they tend to be successful or look successful. And society tends to go, oh, this is a good person, and right, and they are good people. I'm not saying they're not. But what I am saying is they seriously lack an understanding of anything other than social mores and their own reality. And then they try to make everything objective, and they try to make their language objective and their behaviors objectively measurable because they want to be understood, but they don't care about understanding other people. Okay, the third style, I'll say I because it's the way I wrote it, pretending I'm the person. I become aware that people experience my words and actions in a way that depends on their history, their culture, their brain, their age, their time in life, their family of origin, their mood that day, and that I have some responsibility to take that into account, right? So this is a person who does and did understand, became understanding of their own reality and their own needs and how they see things, but they've also now expanded into go, oh, but other people also experience things and see things, and other people also want society to say, oh, you count too, and the way you feel is objectively true too, and you deserve to have boundaries too, and you, right? They understand I'm not the only one. I can't just follow society's rules and go, well, reward me because someone else doesn't exactly fit society's rules, right? Everyone has a right. So this third personality style, they become aware that other people experience my actions, my words, dependent on all of these subjective things. And what's interesting about these people is, as opposed to the one that I just talked through, the second one, which is predictable and does well in society, even though they're narcissistic and not actually very empathetic or understanding of others, but they play by the rules well. This third person understands more and is more empathetic and understanding, but they're much more neurotic, and they don't do as well in society. And this is why. At this stage, people become very neurotic, anxious, and conflicted. Part of them asserts that they have a right to intend a meaning and to choose actions and words that reflect their own intention. And part of them tells them that they are also responsible for how their actions and words are experienced. But it is still a binary right-wrong scenario. They're still seeing things in fairly black and white. they have their own wants and needs, and they know other people have their wants and needs, and they want everyone to be happy, but it's still a binary for them. If I'm right, you're wrong. And if you're right, I'm wrong. Right? So these people become very focused on apologizing to or being apologized to when someone hurts them. This is because they still unconsciously view friction and misunderstandings as a sign that someone was right and someone was wrong. If they feel that they were wrong, they feel deep shame and guilt and profusely apologize. If they feel someone else was wrong, they expect the same. They expect someone to feel shame and guilt and to profusely apologize. You see this a lot in our society. People who have some understanding of the needs of minority groups and the needs of minority religions and the needs of people who are underserved or very, very small embattled groups. And they understand this, but they operate with intense shame and guilt. And if they do something wrong, they feel horrible and they just apologize profusely, blah, blah, blah. But also, if anyone else makes any misstep or hurts someone or says the wrong thing, they will just fucking crucify them in social media. And they will happily make sure that they lose their job, and they'll just feel so righteous that this person must be horribly punished. But they're so neurotic and anxious because they know at some unconscious level they're going to screw up sometimes, and they also think that they deserve to be treated that way. So ironically, those people sometimes will become the biggest liars when they screw up. You see this in the extreme left. The extreme right will lie about what they do, and they will lie about harm they cause. But at some point, they'll just be like, fuck you, I don't care. You're a wuss. You're a wimp. Stop being so sensitive. But the extreme left, because they're at that stage where they still see everything as right, wrong, and if you're wrong, I'm right, and if I'm wrong, you're right. And they feel so much shame and guilt that you'll see this in, for example, liberal organizations like universities, blah, blah, blah. It was shocking to me because I knew that liberal communities were much more open and honest and genuine about kindness to embattled groups and minority groups and the subtle ways in which we hurt people within our society. I knew that they were telling the truth and they saw it. But when the most egregious things happen in their own communities, they will lie their fucking asses off. They will lie their asses off. They don't even lie. The right will just, the extreme right will just unashamedly lie and be like, fuck you, I don't care, I think you're full of shit, and I'm not admitting anything to you. Right? That's what's going on with them. The extreme left will go into denial, like the most raging, obvious denial, and will pretend that what happened didn't happen. And then they will find some other scapegoat or victim to project all the blame on, and they'll blame that person. You'll see the most egregious misfires of justice in the extreme left because they're in this personality style. Those organizations are in this personality style where they think that they're really open and understanding and empathetic, but they still are very black, white, and very binary. And so if somebody's wrong, I'm right. And they should feel intensely ashamed and they need to be punished. But then if it happens in their own house, they feel so much intense shame they can't. I'm telling you right now, I've spent my entire adult life in liberal institutions, in education, in psychology, in research, in whatever. And I'm telling you right now, the most egregious and raging denial about not like confusing situations, but ragingly obvious situations that are wrong, those communities will cover it up like the Catholic Church covers up pedophilia, right? Just like it's historically documented, and they'll just pretend it's not happening. This is a big problem with this stage where it's still binary. There's tons of guilt and shame. Now I'm going to riff, right? This is my podcast. I say shit. You don't have to take it seriously. This is just, I'm riffing in the moment. When you have the extreme right, the toxic extreme right, I don't mean that this is true about the right. I mean the toxic extreme right, they tend to be that first personality type. They have no awareness of their own. They tend to be the first or second personality stage. They have no awareness of their own unconscious habits, of their behaviors, how they impact animals, how they impact other people, how their behavior and their beliefs, their religious beliefs impact the LGBTQ community, et cetera, et cetera. But they're a bit chaotic with it. They just don't care. Right? But it's not that they're sociopaths and they don't care because they're bad people. They just don't care because they don't notice patterns at all. Or they tend to be the second group where they do well, they're decent, upstanding people, but they refuse to understand anything that doesn't fit what society told them is right or wrong. Because they're still at that very legalistic level where I'm just doing what everyone says is right, therefore I'm right. There has to be something that's objectively right. Right? And they're very buried in this. That third stage is very toxic left wing. And again, I'm not talking about the right wing or central or reasonable left wing, reasonable right wing. I'm talking about the toxic extremes, right? The toxic extreme left wing is that third personality style, very neurotic, very anxious, very confused. They are aware. So the thing that's good about them is they are aware of the needs of embattled groups in society. They are aware of terrible historical injustices and how horribly that would impact groups of people. But they still do everything as an extreme binary, good, evil, bad, right, right, wrong. It's still like a childish way of relating to reality. And so when someone else is right and they're wrong, they feel intense shame and they have to punish themselves and apologize profusely for even small infractions, right? But when someone else does something wrong, they will shame the living fuck out of them. They will destroy their life. They will dox them. They'll make sure they lose their job. And suddenly these people who were kind of about empathy suddenly have no empathy. They behave like sociopaths, but it's because they're still in that black and white thinking. And there's so much chaos and they feel so confused and so anxious. They want something to be right and wrong, right? So they're similar to that second stage. The third stage is similar because they still want something to be right and wrong so that somebody can be wrong and somebody can be right, but they're not doing it to be bad. They're doing it because they want some clarity, because they're full of so much conflict, because the world is confusing and there's lots of gray area and there's so much subjective experience, right? And they don't know how to resolve that. So they're very neurotic. And they still view unconscious friction to misunderstanding as a sign that someone was right and wrong, right? This person often ends up with a mixture of self-blame and shame and blaming of and shaming of other. And they neurotically ruminate. So this is important because you see this all the time. They neurotically ruminate on events and experiences in which they were hurt or felt offended, constantly flip-flopping between guilt and anger, Anger when they're like, it really was that other person and they should know better and why did they do that and blah, blah. But they also have that instinct to know that it's like, well, I might have had a part in it, and they'll feel intensely guilty. And because their equation is someone has to be 100% right and someone has to be 100% wrong, which is not what the situation, they just struggle. They flip-flop back and forth. And so you'll see a person like this who doesn't get help or who doesn't evolve out of this will sit there and ruminate about something they experienced 30 years ago. But it's not because they're just a resentful person or they just can't let go of it. It's because their brain is trying to turn it into a black and white situation. and they hold themselves responsible and they feel super guilty. It was my fault. But then they know that the other person really was wrong in a way, and then they get really angry, but then that's not right. I don't want to be that person. And they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. This person does not realize that the human condition is nobody's fault, but it is everybody's responsibility. Okay? That should be a fucking t-shirt. That should be a bumper sticker. Listen, because this introduces the last style. This person often ends up with a mixture of self-blame and shame and blaming of others, and they neurotically ruminate on events and experiences, flip-flopping between guilt at self and anger towards others, because they don't realize that the human condition is nobody's fault, but everybody's responsibility. They don't realize that the human condition is nobody's fault, but it is everybody's responsibility. So this brings us to this personality style. And certainly you could think, oh, this is right an advanced stage. I don't have an opinion about that. But here's the last stage, and this will close what has been a bit of a didactic, sort of dry, I thought, but I don't know. It's very helpful to me. This last person speaking in the first person as if I'm the person. I have a subtle, extensive awareness of my own humanity, that it's my right to be fallible, to be human, to err is to human. I have a pretty good understanding of my own true intentions and my right to act and speak in the world, and to attempt to have fidelity between my behaviors and my words and my intentions. At the same time, I have a subtle, extensive awareness of the infinitude of ways that other beings can infer, attribute meaning, and experience my actions and words. I do not value the state of the other as more important. I do not value others' experiences above my own, and I do not value my experience above others. Let me say that again. It's important. I do not value others' experiences above my own, and at the same time, I do not value my experience over other people's experiences. At the same time, always holding both realities in your head. I recognize that both realities create a beautiful, complex, ever-shifting dynamic requiring profound love, respect, humility, honesty, intention, authenticity, and presence at all times. When I hurt others, I repair without guilt or shame towards myself, simply because I love the other with an equal passion as I love self. And when I am hurt, I set boundaries without anger or shame because I love self with equal commitment as I love other. And I'm going to read that last part again too. When I hurt others, I repair without guilt or shame, simply because I love other with equal passion as I love self. And when I am hurt, I set boundaries without anger or shame for the other, because I love self with equal commitment as I love other. I think I said that wrong. I should be saying I love other with equal commitment as I love self. Maybe a little dry, but man, this really helped me in my head to see that there are these different types of people. And in couples therapy, tons of work is people at different stages and levels here marry one another. And when I say that, I can tell you right now that couples match emotional maturity, period. Couples match emotional maturity, period. But what will happen is one member out of the couple will have strong fidelity and understanding of self and others in one facet of humanity and not on the other. So I'll give you an example of this. I have strong fidelity between my language and my actions, and my intentions and my language and my intentions and my actions. Strong. It's really important to me that if I say I'm going to do something, that I do it. It's important that when I say something, it's legitimately true, and that my behaviors add up to reflect that, yes, that is a true, that is a truth. And in other areas, I'm at, I think, like stage 2. I'll give you an example. So I've had tons of experience. I'm hyperverbal. I've had tons of experience verbally. I've written for decades. I've been a therapist for well over a decade. Like, right? So this is like spent my whole life doing that. So of course you're going to develop some expertise. But I've had very little experience entertaining others. Meaning having people over for a dinner party, inviting friends over, and opening a bottle of wine, getting some snacks, putting it together, blah, blah, blah. So I'm at stage 2. I understand that I understand what I like, and I understand my capacity to do things. I understand not violating myself. I'm not going to invite a bunch of kids over and have them get drunk at my house, because that's not me. I'm not into it, right? So I understand myself. And I understand what society says is a good thing. Your house should probably be clean, and try to have some food that's interesting and tastes good, and maybe offer some alcoholic drinks if people are into that. Maybe know how to make a couple drinks. But I don't really understand who and what people are as far as how they enjoy food and how they enjoy being invited over and being hosted, because I have very little. First of all, my parents didn't model that. Second of all, I left home at 19 and lived like a wild animal till I was about 40. And then because there's so much trauma and anxiety involved in it, I've done very little of it. I have not entertained a lot. And so I can do it, but you can see that there's a lack of understanding and basic empathy for who someone else really is. And I've seen much younger friends invite us over and sort of marveled at like how they remember exactly what I like to drink and what kind of food I like and how we like this and that, and that we like this kind of TV. So, hey, do you want to watch this movie? Right? They just remember that shit. I don't. I'm very narcissistic that way because I haven't developed a complex understanding of who other people are. So I'm not saying this to throw myself under the bus. I'm saying this to say there's going to be facets of you in which you're at different levels of awareness. There's going to be facets of you where you're at different levels of awareness. Some facets you're going to be near the last stage where you understand, right? Verbally, if I talk to someone, I understand, and I have a very good feel for how other people feel when they're talking, and how words make people feel, and how behavior makes people feel. If I'm sitting down in a room with somebody, I can feel how it works for them. I don't need to refer to society saying, do it this way, do it, blah, blah, blah. I've developed that stage 4 where I can hold my own reality as well as their reality and respect both and navigate that. But that's just that. There are many facets of me where I'm at stage 2. Right? So I'm not saying this to criticize myself. I'm saying this to say, don't get caught up in the idea that you're just the spiritual being advancing through these, and you looked at it and you're like, well, I'm really closer to the last one, and these idiots are blah, blah, blah. Well, there might be some facet in which you are at stage 4 and someone else is at 1 or 2, but there's facets of them where they're at stage 4 and you're at stage 1 or 2. And if you have not acknowledged your own stage 1 and 2, guess what? You are a stage 1 or 2. If you are not aware that you have facets of your personality that are stage 1 and 2, you are a stage 1 and 2. Because part of being at that final stage requires that you begin to realize all the parts of you and see all the parts of you that don't work, or that you haven't developed an awareness and an empathy and understanding of other people and how it works. And you become much more forgiving of yourself knowing that that's true. And you also become much more forgiving of other people knowing that it's true about you, right? So the only people claiming to only be at stage 3 and stage 4 are people who are stage 1 and stage 2. I love it. Anyway, guys, that's my spiel. That's what I wanted to do today. It just happened this morning. I thought that out. And I thought I would share that with you guys. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I love you guys. Have a good day.
Just for today, everything's okay. Everything's okay.